Good evening, everyone, and a warm welcome to our lecture this evening, all about the Galloway Hoard. It's wonderful to welcome you to Kirkcudbright Galleries to hear from Steven Dey all about his work on replicating the Galloway Hoard Vessel, which is behind me. My name is Shona Burns, and I'm the facilitator this evening. I'm an arts officer here at Kirkcudbright Galleries. A few pieces of housekeeping before I introduce our speaker this evening. Hopefully there aren't any, but should you have any technical issues, please post them in the Q&A and we'll do our best to help. This event is being recorded and it will be made available on YouTube in the coming weeks. Our previous lectures are already there and you can find links to these on our website and Facebook page. Steven Dey of ThinkC3D Ltd will be describing how he produced a physical 3D replica of the Galloway Hoard silver vessel, even though the original was largely covered behind an ancient cloth wrapping. He starts by describing various digital 3D scanning techniques he applied and how this helped reveal the fascinating surface details, including images of leopards and tigers. He then goes on to describe the production of the physical replica, which became part of the Galloway Hoard exhibition, as you can see, using a mixture of 3D printing and traditional techniques. After this fascinating lecture, we'll be having a live Q&A where you can post all your questions to Steven. So please feel free to post the questions in the chat and the Q&A as the event progresses. ThinkC3D are creators of high quality digital heritage 3D content for museums, galleries and university researchers, scientists, healthcare educators, virtual reality content producers, TV and cinema. Steven is the founder of ThinkC3D and with a client list that includes many world-class museums. We're delighted to have Steven join us today to tell us more about the Galloway Hoard replica vessel. And just to remind everyone, if you have any questions, please post them in the Q&A function. I'll pass over to Steven now. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, thanks very much, Shona, for that introduction. I've got a bit of a presentation to describe all the different bits that have been introduced there. I think it's probably about 20 minutes or so, but it depends. If I go off on a tangent, it might take longer, but hopefully not. Yes, I'm just going to share my presentation now. Oops, and then start from the beginning. Yeah, so tonight's talk is about creating a replica of the vessel that was found as part of the Galloway Hoard. An absolutely remarkable discovery, and one which was a real pleasure for me to get involved in terms of apply some of my knowledge and techniques to it. It's largely about sort of 3D technologies that I applied to try and unwrap this amazing vessel, rather than a lot of the background history about the actual vessel itself. I know there's already been lectures about that. I mean, obviously I'll touch on it, but mostly it's about the sort of 3D stuff and the technology, which is my specialism. So I started this small business called ThinkC3D in 2015. It's essentially a 3D production studio. It's very small. There's only a few of us involved. I started it after I had started a few companies previously to do with technology companies, but this one was a very much a personal project. I tried to incorporate within it all of the things that I find interesting. Before, back in 2001, I was part of a team that founded another company called Commerce Decisions that was very much a software business, and in that business we actually created a piece of software that was used by the Olympic Delivery Authority to sort of help in the production of the Olympic Games back in 2012. But now this business, ThinkC3D, is very much a 3D digital heritage business. It's something I've always been very passionate about and interested in, and it's something that has led me down many interesting alleyways. So I'll just sort of talk about just a few of the projects I've been involved with. I've been involved in literally hundreds of projects, but this was quite an exciting one I was involved in last year, which was 3D scanning the largest ichthyosaur ever discovered in the British Isles, which was down in Rutland Water. It was an absolutely fascinating project, and I was down there in the mud for about 2 or 3 days scanning this ichthyosaur, and what you can see in the image is a two-dimensional printout of the three-dimensional model at actual size of the actual beast, which is 10 meters long. Yeah, it was an absolutely fantastic project, and a lot of the skills that I've been developing over the years were really tested out fully in a project like that. So that was actually featured on Digging for Britain on BBC Two. But it's working at ThinkSeed 3D. There's a huge diversity of projects. So I get involved in so many different types of projects: natural history and cultural history, archaeology, paleontology, all the different subjects. But in all of those different subject areas, I'm applying similar techniques. So this is one type of 3D scanning, which was to obviously scan a large reptile in the ground, but other techniques were used on the Galloway Hoard. So who are we? So essentially it's a company that provides natural and cultural heritage 3D digital services, but we also do some art. We work with healthcare educators sometimes, scientists, artists, a real mix of people, and we've really innovated some of the techniques that I've applied to this project and other projects in 3D scanning, 3D printing, virtual reality, and so on. And also we contribute to sort of the academic side of it, like developing some of the techniques and trying to record some of the things we're learning. So I published a chapter of this book for example. But we're actually very small, and we're just based in a little studio just outside Oxford. We work for some seriously big museums: British Museum, National Museum of Scotland, of course, V&A, Natural History Museum in London, and museums all over the world. But we also work for universities a lot. So universities are very interested in all this area as well. So we do a lot of work with those. I've worked on such a diverse range of projects, as I mentioned. In fact, here's just a small selection of the kind of projects we do. So in the bottom corner, we've got some the skull, and the phrenology head was done for the Science Museum in London. There's Worcester Museum was the mammoth tusk, and and there's a restoration of a whale skeleton where we actually printed bits of the skeleton for a museum in Cumbria. So yeah, so it's the full range of things there. So first question is, what is this 3D technology you're talking about? Well, it's a kind of range of different technologies, but they're all about sort of representing this remarkable 3D world we find ourselves living in inside a computer. By representing the 3D world inside a computer, it allows us to view it, to study it, to design, to create stuff around the digitized 3D things. And we're all familiar with this stuff because anyone that plays a 3D video game, if you're younger, is quite familiar with this stuff. You're playing things like Fortnite, you're playing in a 3D world, digital 3D world. But obviously TV and cinema are heavily using 3D. Designers are obviously creating things digitally nowadays, architects the same, and even artists are often developing ideas now on a computer first before it actually becomes a physical object. So yeah, in every sphere, pretty much nowadays, digital 3D is making itself known, and the skills are useful across a range of sectors. So it's very much a kind of useful area of set of skills that really need to be developed. So one of the things you can do, obviously, is you can create models from scratch in the digital world on a computer, but you can also 3D scan real world objects, and this is something we're very much involved in. By a whole variety of techniques, you can actually digitize the 3D world. Not only individual objects, but entire scenes, entire landscapes can be 3D digitized and have been. So it's an exciting area for kind of capturing the world, and we'll talk about this shortly, but for heritage, it offers a whole range of sort of exciting possibilities. So yeah, 3D is something, it's a very, very powerful new technology, but I almost like to think of it as a bit of a new medium for artists and creators to actually be able to create new kinds of things. And in fact, they don't have to be just 3D, they can in fact be 4D, because you can animate these things as well. So, and once you've animated them, you can also put them into virtual reality. So once you've digitized things, you can then view them in so many different ways. So why is 3D important for heritage? Well, you know, for the last 180 years or so, we've been photographing things. Before that, people in heritage, they drew things. I mean, it's a way, firstly, of recording heritage in a completely new way, in a kind of new and a very detailed way. And that's useful for a whole range of reasons. It gives also, because when you digitize something, the word digit means number, so you're actually turning the object into a set of numbers, which allows you to better measure it. So it becomes, for science, making things into 3D makes it more measurable and easier to measure than just using a tape measure. And for artists, it gives them a way to literally create anything they can dream of. You know, you can create whole worlds in 3D. So it's fantastic. And for education, it's a new way of visualizing, helping you to imagine what things would have looked like, or allow you to see inside, say, that a heart, what does it look like from the inside of a heart while it's beating, or, you know, all of these kinds of things, these new possibilities are thrown up by 3D. So the other thing to say is, just like, you know, taking a photograph, you can say is, you know, a fairly easy thing, but actually it is, there's a lot of choices when you take a photograph. So, you know, photography is rightly recognized as an art form. Well, in a way, digital 3D is also an art form. There's so many different choices and ways of creating things that it's important to recognize that the 3D things that are models and creative things that are being created in 3D are themselves works that need to be thought about. So I think there's a lot of interesting things there. Yeah, so how do we use 3D in our heritage work at Think C3D? Well, we do a whole range of things. We make physical replicas, which we'll come on to when we talk about the vessel, and simulations of things. And they're useful for a whole range of things. Sometimes what I call impossible exhibits can be created. This is an example where it's not possible to actually exhibit the original, so we can create an exhibit that would otherwise be difficult to see. But because 3D physical replicas are not the valuable original, it means it's possible to actually handle them. So you can create replicas that can be touched, which is, especially for younger people and kids, a great way to sort of engage them in heritage. So you can also create things that might be hidden or difficult to display, or that have been lost. So it's possible to recreate things that are no longer available, or are too far away or too difficult to get to. So that's another exciting thing. For conservation reasons, you know, 3D records of objects give you a very detailed record of what the thing looked like at this time. And, you know, for future, if you're talking about conserving objects, you've got a very detailed three-dimensional record of a three-dimensional object. So that's very useful. It can be used in restorations to, you know, repair things. We use this a lot in our natural history work, where, you know, often there are bones missing from specimens that want to be exhibited, so we can make missing pieces using our sort of 3D techniques. And there's a whole more things. I won't go into all these in detail, but some of them are, you know, include creating objects to repatriate to other countries, for example. So you know, if there's a piece in the museum that another town or another country even wants to have a copy of, it's now feasible to do that and to create quite realistic copies of that. And, you know, you can also, you don't have to create physical copies, you can create digital copies of things, and you can even create whole digital worlds. So that's really exciting. exciting possibility. In fact, here is an example of visualization. So what we've got is a whale arch here that was 3D scanned, and it's basically a huge whale arch, and unusual in that it's got actually four bones within it. And this was scanned for conservation reasons, but it was thought quite useful to be able to imagine what it would look like if it was reinstalled. So we created this visualization here to show some scanned 3D models within an environment where it would originally have been. So that's an example of visualizing using 3D. None of that is real. That's all virtual. So yeah. So there's a lot of reasons why we create them. It's I've already covered some of this actually. I've just gone back. How do we actually create our 3D productions here at MC3D? Well, it always starts with some sort of digital production process before the sort of physical production process can start. And we use a mixture of things. We use a technique called photogrammetry, which is where essentially you take loads and loads of photographs all around an object or a scene, and there's specialist software which will take all those photographs, bring them together and turn them into a 3D model of that object. And what's nice about photogrammetry is it also captures all the color and the detail and creates a sort of photographic looking 3D model. That's a really useful technique. Another technique we use is CT scanning. CT scanning is very much developed at the sort of medical need for scanning, and it's a technique which I'll come on to, but basically X-ray scans a three-dimensional object in a series of slices, and by looking at those slices you can actually reconstruct a three-dimensional surface model of a particular aspect you're looking at. And we've over the years developed ways to sort of process that CT data, and that was the technique that we actually used on the Galloway Hoard Vessel. But we're also quite arty in our 3D think C3D, so we can also digitally sculpt things either from scratch or against reference information. So there are cases where we've where all we've got is a photograph or a drawing of perhaps a lost object, and we've been able to sort of reconstruct it from those drawings. So that's another nice way of creating things. Once we've got a digital 3D model, what we then do is we generally 3D print it. Here at MC3D, we've got a series, we've got a few 3D printers. Typically, we either print it in color on a gypsum color printer that we have, or we use a very high resolution acrylic printer, and that's very good for very fine, very detailed things. And in fact, that was the printer we used to reconstruct the Galloway Hoard Vessel. But we don't just 3D print, we actually like to make things look realistic. So we do quite a lot of more traditional techniques to actually finish the 3D print, to give it a much more of a feel of the real thing. So that's the sort of finishing part of our process. So what did we do on this vessel? I will describe how we came to that image over the next few slides. So, as you know, the remarkable vessel contained many remarkable objects. I know they don't know the exact date, but it's clearly a lot earlier than the burial date, which was AD 900. It was found locally to the museum, I know, and it contains, it was wrapped in some really remarkable fabrics, which were just very, very well preserved, and are for archaeologists as much treasure as the actual object itself. So the National Museum of Scotland commissioned the British Museum to use their specialist micro CT scanner to actually scan the vessel, firstly so they could see what was inside it without before they started to open it up and conserve it, but also to try and get a peek under those wrappings, so they could see how the vessel itself was decorated. The work was originally to process the scan data, was actually done to start with by the Glasgow School of Art, and they did, to be fair to them, they did a really good job of it, because it was a very difficult set of CT scans to process. But after that process was done, they created an initial print, and they felt like there wasn't really enough detail visible on the actual initial print that they did. So I was asked originally just to come in and create some second and third copies of the vessel that had already been created, in order to create some handling models for educational outreach projects that were going on around this exhibition. But because I'd done quite a lot of CT work before on other projects, I said, well, could I have a look at that data? Because perhaps I might be able to actually pull out a little bit more detail on that surface that they were interested in. And if I could, then I could enhance that surface and potentially get that detail on an actual 3D print. So at this point, there wasn't actually much time before the exhibition started. So Martin Goldberg said, yeah, have a go, see what you can do. Here's the data. So over a weekend, I started processing the data to see what I could get. Now, I had quite a bit of experience of this work already. So when you a CT scanner, you can actually see an ichthyosaur skull there, and you can just see a sort of arch behind it. So that's one kind of CT scanner. What CT scanners actually do is just take effectively a slice through the object, and it's, if you imagine it as a very thin slice, and then they repeat that over and over again. So you end up with hundreds potentially of these thin slices through the object. In the case of the ichthyosaur, we managed to scan the skull and create some models of it, and also the paddle here, you can see that. And this was an earlier project I did on a Sumerian tablet. And on this one, it was a tablet that was actually hidden in a clay envelope. What you have to do with CT scanning is actually isolate the aspect of the slice that you're actually interested in. And in this case, you can see the sort of grey blue area was the part that was interesting. So I had to literally go through all these hundreds of slices trying to sort of define the bit that was of interest. But once you've isolated it, you can then create a 3D model of that surface. And so that's what, and in this case, I also 3D printed it out. So there was this ancient Sumerian tablet with the writing on it. It was actually 5,000 years old and never been read, but suddenly it was out of its envelope virtually, if you like, and then they could, and then the Syrianologist actually translated it. And what's interesting about that is it was actually from one official to another official ordering the ingredients for beer. It's a big thing in ancient Sumeria, drinking beer. So that tablet was a really interesting project. So I applied the same sorts of techniques to the vessel, looking at each slice. And as you can see, this is actually from the CT software itself. You can see sort of top-down view and side views and front view. Front view and side view looked very similar because it's symmetrical around the Z axis. But you can also see it's a little bit fuzzy in that image, and there's some artifacts and effects. It was actually quite difficult to really enhance that surface. And it turns out, because the object is made of silver and gold, or gold, well, sort of gold leaf, that surface was very, very thin. So to pull out that detail was pretty tricky, and it took quite a few hours to get there. But in the end, I did manage to extract quite a nice surface model of the vessel, and it was astounding to see it. I mean, when you suddenly, from looking at those fuzzy pictures, you suddenly see this incredible surface. It was very exciting. And talking to Martin about it, I said, look what's there. And he was like really pleased as well. You could see that this thing had come from quite a long way away. It's got, as you can see at the bottom here, you've got tigers, you've got leopards, and you've got this amazing sort of fire temple, which are Zoroastrian symbols apparently. So this is this comes from thousands of miles away, and it was older than when it had been buried, quite a bit older. So this thing was an antique when it was buried, and you just think, how did this thing come to be there? A fascinating story, which I know is an ongoing investigation. But from my point of view, to sit there and look at this view on my screen was wonderful. So I could see all these creatures. So the next challenge was the lid. So the lid had more corrosion on it, so it was even more difficult to really get the detail out. But it had sort of similar symbols. But the lid itself also had these like little interesting sort of dragons or cats on three of them on the actual the handle itself. So the lid was another set of challenges. And then once that was done, what I decided to do was to try to render it in a way, just so I created the 3D model. So how could I sort of show that 3D model off to show how detailed it was? So I created what's called a render, which is what you do is you take your 3D model and you bathe it in virtual light in a virtual scene, and then you create something which looks quite photographic, but it isn't. It's completely virtual. So this is a sort of what they call a ray traced render of the vessel, and it just showed what a beautiful object it really was. You could start to imagine how it would have looked when it was just before it was buried way back in 900 AD. And in fact, I tried to imagine it sitting on a bench of the guy or woman that was about to bury it, with a nice stone wall in the background there. But perhaps I was getting a bit carried away at the time, but I tried to imagine what it would have looked like when it was sat new on the bench. Later on, I discovered, of course, that the black areas shouldn't be black, they should actually be gold. And the reason they're black is in the CT scan, gold absorbs more X-rays than silver. So later on, I actually made this view with the black areas gold. So the next problem was to then, so I came back with this information to Martin and the team at NMS, and they just were really, really pleased, and they said, right, is there any chance you could not only make those educational models, but can you actually make an exhibition model so that we can actually put the work you've done into a physical replica that can actually be shown? And they were very, very keen to make sure that those cats were visible, and the fire temple and so on. So the 3D printing was the next challenge, but by this point we only had about a week left. So I had to make a call on how I was going to do it, and I had one shot of it, and it was only a week before the exhibition was actually happening. So I needed to make it. I needed to make the right decisions. So what I decided to do was to do a high resolution 3D print, because the detail is very fine on that surface. And then I decided that I would hand finish it, and I would actually gild the body of it with silver, which you can do. So take the 3D print and eventually cover it with a thin layer of silver, so it looks more like the original. And then literally hand painting some of the gold, just to give you a sense of that gold. I was told not to make it too realistic, because we didn't want to confuse the audience into them thinking it might be the real thing. And I didn't, and it shouldn't look too new. So I had to bear in mind not to overdo it and make it too realistic. But to be honest, there wasn't a great deal of time left. So the more time you spend on it, the more real it could look. But at that point, there was only a week to go before the exhibition. So I'm just going to show you. Here is a very brief video. It's not very exciting, but this is the actual vessel 3D printing in my printer at C3D. And what you can see there is the actual vessel is actually upside down. And the laser, which hopefully you can see scanning across the bottom, is actually just creating one layer through the of the actual object. And what happens is the object sort of almost slightly grows out of the liquid. So this particular 3D printer uses a liquid acrylic, and the acrylic gets actually fused into a solid by the laser scanning across. And that laser is I think it's an ultraviolet laser. So this chemical, it's the acrylic, fuses when ultraviolet touches it. And that's kind of how it works. And 3D printing is just built up in layer after layer after layer until you sort of create the object. So that was the 3D print being created. Just move on. Once you finish a 3D print on this particular kind of printer, you find there's actually quite a lot of structure around it. So if you look at the first picture, you can see the lid actually still with its supporting structure around it. So the next job was really to remove that structure and then to clean up any points where the structure actually had held the actual object. So, and you can see the object at this point is actually clear. So the highest resolution acrylic you can use is a sort of clear acrylic, and it's also one of the strongest ones, so it's a good material to use. It's obviously not the right color for the actual vessel, but we knew that later on I was going to surface treat that to make it look more realistic using other techniques. So the main job at this point was really to get an accurate model and then to remove it from the printing structure. And then what you do is you actually give it a bath in a UV bath, they call it, but it's actually a little chamber that has UV lights. And the UV light makes sure that the material is fully fused to the highest strength it can go, and it will bake in this oven. But I took this photo because it's got a load of mirrors in the UV bath, so it creates this interesting infinity effect. And here on the photo at the end here, you can see this is the finished 3D printed vessel before I started working on the surface of it. And at that point, it was still fairly clear. So the next stage was actually gild the surface. So what you do is anyone's had a go at gilding, it's great fun. You basically put a kind of very thin glue over the surface of the object, and then you stick sheets of silver or gold, if you're using gold, over the thing, and then use special brushes to sort of smooth and burnish it in. It's a very satisfying activity, and you can create these sort of very, very thin layer of silver or whatever metal you're using on the surface. And you can see after the gilding had finished, like on the lid here, it was very, very shiny, very shiny indeed, and it didn't look very old. So later on, I had to do some work to actually reduce the polish on it, using some spray and some waxes to actually tarnish it a bit and make it look older, which at the time we were thinking, oh, it's a shame to make it look so dusty and old, but actually it does make it look more the part. Yeah, and so here is the nearly, in that case it was the nearly finished article, slightly tarnished, not so shiny as you saw in the previous one, but you can also see where the gold had been inlaid with some special gold paint to give it the detailing as well. And you can see on the final 3D print, you can see those leopards and tigers, which was the objective. And so that was all completed within a week. So it was quite a project, but it was really, really amazing from my perspective, because a lot of the techniques I've used before came together to produce this object in speedy time. And you know, and I was really pleased that the museum up in Edinburgh was so happy with it. And you can see the start point was this picture here. This is the way at that time the vessel looked, and and this was the imagining of it based on the CT scans. So yeah, so next time I saw that object, because that was couriered, it was literally couriered that day up to the museum in Edinburgh. And about a month later, I was in Scotland to do some scanning of a fossilized tree at the Botanic Gardens in Edinburgh. And so I managed to take an hour off to go and come and meet with Martin and come and have a look at the vessel on. And he gave me this wonderful tour of the exhibition, and there it was, the vessel I'd made in its cabinet, and you know, it was really a really wonderful project to be part of. There's a lot more information about the vessel itself, and you can also view some of the 3D models that were created, the digital 3D models on screen at the National Museum Scotland website. So there's a real nice article on there about the Galloway Hoard Vessel, and it talks about the 3D printing a little bit, and you can also click into this other site which actually has a collection of 3D models for the museum, and you can actually look at the 3D models on there as well. So so that was most of my involvement in the actual vessel, but there was a few there was an extra project that came along a little bit later, which was to actually look at one of the objects inside the vessel, and there was a really remarkable crystal and gold jar which was found in it, which was probably contained some sort of ointment, and it so I did a little bit of work on that to help them visualize that, because it was a mixed, it had different materials, so to create a sort of 3D model of that had those different materials was quite a challenge. So I helped the museum to actually create this other vessel, which was actually found inside the previous vessel. So yeah, so that can be seen. That can also be seen on this this National Museum Scotland Sketchfab account, where you can see the 3D models. Yeah, it's been an amazing project. I was really glad to be part of it. Yeah, that's really about the end of my talk on it. But I'll be happy to answer any questions anyone might have about the processes.
That was really fascinating. Thank you so much, Stephen. I didn't actually realize that you'd been working on the rock crystal jar as well.
Yes, that was amazing thing in itself as well, with especially with the writing of the bishop's name underneath, and probably the crystal itself was probably Roman, I think. So yeah, fascinating.
Yeah. So did you do some of the work on the fabric stuff as well? I know we've got the 3D model of the fabric and the 3D model of the cleaned vessel.
No, I haven't done that. I was just, what I did with that previous one was really that, you know, a lot of the scanning is now being done in this, by the museum, National Museum of Scotland, but I just came in to help sort of reprocess it and render it so that it actually looked, you know, you want more like the actual original object, so that the rock crystal is slightly clear, so you can see through it. So they wanted to sort of make it look more realistic. But that was only a digital project. We didn't get to 3D print it.
Yeah, we've got the 3D model is on like a massive tablet in the exhibition. It's just over there, which is why I keep pointing over there.
Okay, yeah. I was involved a bit in that as well. Yeah. No, I can see it behind you. Obviously, it looks fantastic. The actual vessel itself.
Yeah, and I'm lucky enough to use the handling kits as well, so I got all the the original ones. Yeah. Excellent.
Yeah. I hope that was okay for everyone. It's actually very strange doing a presentation when you're actually presenting to a wall in your own computer. So I prefer to present to people and have interaction, but hopefully that was useful.
Yeah, no, it was really interesting. We've had a couple questions. So One of the questions that we've had is actually about like 3D printing in general, I think, 3D scanning. So someone was asking, what about air pockets and ash from eruptions? Is it something that can be scanned and reproduced to produce what was burnt? Just wondering if technology works like that.
Yeah, I suppose, well, I have never tried such a thing, but I can imagine that if you could, X-ray CT scanning, if you could somehow remove that piece and get it into a CT scanner, then you could potentially scan what was inside the space, and then create the surface model from that space, which is kind of what they did in Pompeii, wasn't it? But there they filled it with plaster and then chipped away all the rocks. So you could do that digitally. I would definitely imagine that is possible if you can get the thing in the scanner, because that might be a problem.
That's the big challenge.
Huge pieces of equipment and they're very expensive, so you can't. You have to move the objects to the scanner in most cases.
Here's another one that's quite nice. What are the biggest challenges you faced in the process that perhaps you didn't expect beforehand?
I think, I didn't have any expectations on me, because the work had already been done by, the Glasgow School of Art, and but the biggest challenge was really extracting that surface in enough detail that I could actually 3D print it and get that detail into the final piece. I think that was a challenge. There was no pressure on me to do it, because it had already been attempted, and I was just doing it. But because I'd worked on so many other projects, I had some tricks up my sleeve, and luckily they worked. They did allow me to get some of the surface.
Yeah, it was really interesting seeing the leopards and tigers and things, because obviously you can see them on this one, but seeing them in the models and everything is so interesting, because I'm so used to using the handling kits ones. So like whenever I come down and look at this one, I'm like, oh yeah, you can actually see them. Yeah, it's something really special. I was really amazed that you were saying how quickly you'd had to turn everything round.
Yeah, I was very much, I came into the game at the end, because they wanted some handling models for the sort of educational spin-out, school visits and so on. They just wanted a few models to handle. So I wasn't really involved in the earlier stages when they were sort of thinking about creating an exhibit. So it was, I came at the end, but I think once they realized what I could potentially do for the project, then it was, well, we've only got a week, can you? And I love a challenge, so why not? I went for it, and I think because I've been doing this quite a few years, I think I was able to make the right choices. But if anything had gone wrong, like say the print had failed or something like that, I would not have been on time. So it was lucky everything worked. Yeah.
I'll just see, we've got a few more. So someone had asked about the 3D file. Can it be made available for 3D printer hobbyists, or was it like a big thing?
Yeah, I've given the rights of it to National Museum Scotland, and so it's really up to them. But in theory, why not? I think it could be done. Museums have a wide range of attitudes to this. Personally, I think it's not a particularly big deal to share models, and you find people do amazing creative things with the models if you share them. Other museums are quite protective of it. They see it as part of their sort of part of their assets. You can understand that as well, because museums are desperate for funding, and it could be a way of finding funding if they've got a valuable model. So really, it's not kind of my problem anymore, because I gave it to the National Museum of Scotland entirely. Yeah.
Up to them. Where else are we going? Can it be viewed on Oculus Quest? I ask as if I know what that means.
Yes, I know what that means. Reality. So if you go onto the Sketchfab website, you can look at things in virtual reality on website. And sorry, I should say on Sketchfab, National Museum of Scotland has a collection of objects, lots of different objects, in fact, including this. So on there, they do have a setting which allows you to fire up a virtual reality headset. But the problem is it's probably too big a model. So it could be possible to actually create a sort of slightly more compatible to virtual reality version, and then yes, it could be viewed more easily. But you could try see if it works. But you might also be able to look at some of the other objects with that. So Sketchfab is an online collection of 3D models. It's a sort of it's actually a commercial company, but a lot of museums put collections on their site, and it's a very good platform for showing off 3D models, including in virtual reality and also augmented reality. So hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, we've got all the little like the QR codes around the exhibition, so you can see all the Sketchfab models compared to like the actual real ones.
Awesome.
So yeah, it's really great because you can see, like we were saying, you can see everything in so much more detail than you would ever be able to through a security case. So it's quite nice being able to like zoom in on things. Yeah,
that's the great thing. I mean, about having a digital model is you can zoom in, whereas the physical model, unless you've got a big magnifying glasses.
Yeah.
And also the resolution of the one online is in some ways is higher because because it's and that allows you to zoom in a bit better to see things like the lines and targets.
Yeah, and being able to move it about as well, and we like kind of used to sitting in a case in a certain way, so being able to actually rotate it and stuff is like just really interesting as someone even like in the exhibition just looking at things. So
well, one of the things was I obviously started with a digital model and I was used to looking at it. And then when I 3D printed it, I thought, oh, have I printed it the right size? Because I knew how many objects were in it, and it seemed quite small, but that's often the size that when you actually make it a physical object, it's not always what you think it's going to be in terms of size. And so it was quite an interesting, it was the right size, by the way, but it was kind of
I was going to say we got a question about that today, actually. Someone had came in and asked, they were like, how did they fit everything in? We were like, this is definitely the right size. So
yeah, I asked Martin about this, and they said it was so carefully packed.
Yeah, it's really amazing. Let me see if we've got any more questions. Yeah, everybody's just asking about the 3D model online.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I think in that presentation there's a link in there. If not, perhaps I don't know if you can share it with the audience. The Sketchfab link, but you've got it anywhere. It's obviously
we've got it all over.
All over the place. Yeah.
Okay, I think Bruce has just popped it in the chat. So if anyone's looking for the online link, it'll be in the chat in a little minute. So it will be available for you all to have a look at. So Stephen, this is just my own interest, but how did you get into it? How did you go from, like, were you a hobby 3D printer?
Yeah. Well, no, I was a bit of an anomaly at school because I liked science, but I also like art, and I was always interested, even way back, like interested in sort of 3D technology. So in my computer lessons, I was trying to create 3-dimensional cubes, and years and years back. And then I studied science at university, and then I went into software technology. And in the bulk of my career, I was working in that, and I started a company. Luckily, it did well, and we sold it. And so when we sold it, I actually was lucky enough to have the opportunity to think, well, what am I going to do next? Can I do something that it really interests me in many different ways? And I came up with this idea of I was sort of exploring 3D printing and 3D scanning, and I found it really fascinating. I was like, how can I incorporate that? And I also, my interest in heritage. I love museums. I've been going to museums all my life. I love, very much interested in science and archaeology, and I'm one of these people that finds everything fascinating. and and so I thought, can I bring all this together? So I started a small company, and first we looked at like scanning people and scanning pets and scanning all different kinds of things, and then 3D printing them. But I wasn't really that interested in it. And then I mentioned I was sort of interested in sort of looking at the 3D scanning and stuff with museums, and through a contact at Oxford Archaeology, they said, oh, the British Museum are actually interested in scanning, well, they're interested in 3D printing some Bronze Age objects. So perhaps you could have a go. So I contacted somebody there, and they came back to me and said, well, here's a few models. Can you make them? So I did, but I didn't just make them using one of those horrible plastic printers. I actually made them really nicely, and I finished the surfaces and tried to make them look nice. And I took them into the British Museum, and they were blown away. They were like, wow, we didn't know you could do this. and then, to my great surprise, I found that a lot of museums, they knew about 3D, and some of them had dabbled in it, but they hadn't really got fully involved in it, and hadn't seen its full potential that perhaps I'd seen at that point. And so I was sort of being an advocate for doing this sort of stuff, and making objects. Museum objects are they're not something you can touch, but the museums are full of 3D objects that once were touched and were handled. There were objects that were created by human hands to be handled by human hands, and yet now they're not. You can't touch them anymore. So I was quite interested in the idea of like using these 3D techniques to create objects that people could actually handle again, especially kids, because it's much more active and exciting. And by using 3D scans, some of the magic of the original object is in the copy. So although it's a copy taken from a scan of the original surfaces. So you've got something of that in there. And I always remember I worked on a few projects where objects have been repatriated to their communities. So we created one object, which was an Irish pilgrim bell for a community in Donegal. And the original is in the British Museum, and it's literally falling apart. I mean, it's so old. So we recreated this bell and made it look realistic, but made it stronger, so it wouldn't fall apart. And then this went to this. It went to this community centre in this little village in Ireland, and it was I got a phone call from them, and it was such a lovely call. I mean, it was like, we love it, we've got our bell back, and we're going to take it on pilgrimages, and it was and you just think, wow, that's what this thing can do. And then similar things happened with some Nigerian bronzes were made, which went to a village in Nigeria. And they were crying in that village when they had their cultural heritage back, because the real stuff, sometimes it's too expensive or it's too fragile or valuable to be in a community museum. But 3D printing kind of gave a way of doing that. In the last few years, we've also just been doing digital collections, because putting things online and sharing it with an entire community of people is another way of sharing that information. And last year we worked on an actual T-Rex, but where it was actually in the lockdown, we actually worked on a T-Rex specimen. We actually 3D scanned a real T-Rex. All of the bones got scanned and then digitized and put on Sketchfab. And it allowed the scientists in America and Britain to basically study the thing in the lockdown. So again, it was sort of vindication. So yeah, I basically, all I did was take my interests and try to turn them into a job. Luckily, and I have been. I mean, I'm never going to be on Dragon's Den or anything, making a fortune from this, because I'm dealing in cultural heritage and nobody's got any money. But it is fantastic work. It's so interesting. It's just. It's it shows you sometimes, if you have enough interest and passion, and there's other people out there that believe in it as well, then make something of it.
So I guess those like repatriation ones have been your favorite ones to do. Have you had any?
They have. I think they have. I mean, when you actually are moving people and they're getting, you think it's only a 3D print, it's not real, but it still has the symbolic value. for people. I think that is quite special.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, even with the Galloway Hoard Vessel, like the amount of people that come in and they're like, this isn't the real one though, is it? And you're like, no, it's not. But
yeah, Bruce was telling me earlier about his son who asked, did the Vikings, were they using 3D printing then?
Yeah. I'm worried that may have been my bad teaching that made him think that, he basically thought that the Vikings had 3D printed the vessel, which was, as I say, may have been my mistake. So, but I'll just see if we've got any more questions. Well, we have one. Someone said this might be a geeky question, but does the software use AI to enhance the surface resolution?
Yes, that is a really interesting question, and no question's too geeky for me, so that's fine. But yeah, well, interestingly, not used on this particular project, but on some projects we use photogrammetry, and photogrammetry comes out of AI vision, computer vision research. So it's allowing computers not just to get like a camera view, but to actually see the sort of three-dimensional world in front of them. It was originally developed for robotics, but somebody realized actually this is a great way of scanning an environment using multiple camera perspectives. So yeah, AI is definitely, there's an element of AI in that, but also there's AI enhancement of like images and things. So I worked on one project where there's some pretty old rough photos, but you can apply AI to them to actually make the photos more clear. And then with that, you could then do photogrammetry to create new models. So I think, and I think a lot of the, I think AI is coming in more and more, and also in kind of creating those 3D renders and doing it in real time now using AI, which is, so the AI figures out what's meant to be there. Yeah. So I haven't sort of used it directly on this project, but yeah, it's definitely making inroads into this one. Yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think we're actually going to wrap up, Stephen. I think we've had all the questions for this evening, so just my little thank yous. So obviously, thank you so much, Stephen, for joining us this evening.
Yeah, I think okay.
No, you'll have to have a trip up next time.
I have been that part of the world before. Yeah, definitely. I had two Scottish grandparents, so I've been to Scotland quite a few times. They passed away long ago, but I have been to the area.
Yeah,
but
you've got to come to Kirkcudbright. I'll have to visit the galleries.
How long have we got the exhibition there for?
We're here until the 10th of July, and then it heads off to Aberdeen. So it'll be in Aberdeen, I think, at the end of July. So yeah.
Yeah, they phoned me up already and asked about doing and they said, "How far away do you live?"
Perfect. So I'll just thanks also to our event sponsors, Art Fund, Garfield Weston Foundation, and Museums Galleries Scotland. It's their continued support that allows us to put on these events. Our next lecture will be our final lecture in the Galloway Hoard lecture series, and that will be announced hopefully in the coming week, but we're really excited. It'll be in June. So please keep an eye on our website and our Facebook. If you're signed up to our events, our Eventbrite page, I can also send you out an email as well with the details of that final lecture. We're also going to be hosting some events at the galleries itself this weekend. On Saturday, we have Cathbad the Viking is coming into the galleries to help you make your own arm ring. So if you want to stop by and give that a go, you're more than welcome. Another thank you to the behind the scenes crew here at Kirkcudbright Galleries and Dumfries and Galloway Council, as well as the National Museums of Scotland. Of course, another thank you to all of you for joining us this evening. The support for this exhibition has been really wonderful, and I look forward to welcoming you to our next event or to the exhibition when you come to visit. We'll also be sending out a short survey about this event in the coming days, and this email will include a link to our social media pages, a great way to keep informed of future events, and it might have the link to the Eventbrite for that final talk. So yeah, thank you all so much for coming, and I really hope you enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you.